time to save a boys' soccer team and their coach trapped in a flooded cave in Thailand. Officials are feeling a new sense of urgency now, with the forecast calling for more monsoon rains.
An active rescue mission is underway.
The left believes that if you challenge their way of thinking and their worldview in an articulate manner, they believe that that's harassment.
President Trump is in the final stages of deciding on his pick for the Supreme Court.
In choosing a new justice, I will select someone with impeccable credentials, great intellect, unbiased judgment, and deep reverence for the laws and Constitution of the United States.
Good morning. We start this morning with a Fox News alert, a life-saving mission and a race against time happening right now at this moment in Thailand to rescue that boys' soccer team trapped inside a cave for 16 days.
The world watching, and so are we as an international team of Navy SEALs have begun diving through narrow, flooded passages to try and bring the boys out one by one.
And the operation is expected to take 2 to 4 days. Crews are racing against severe weather, potentially flooding the dark and dangerous cave again.
Wow. Just getting out of the cave will take the divers and the boys 11 hours round trip. Thai officials are calling the operation their D-Day.
While rescuers and the boys will walk, swim, and climb their way out in complete darkness with only ropes to guide them. Gives you an idea of just how remarkable this is.
And what they've already been through over the past 2 weeks. So we are going to be watching this very, very close this morning for the very latest.
All right, there's a lot of other news happening as well, of course, and maybe the biggest is the fact that the president's conversations, those talks, the summit with Kim Jong-un, a lot of pressure now on whether or not that is coming apart. The U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo just left North Korea in the last 24 hours, has moved on to Japan and Vietnam. I mean, a lot of questions about the pressure the U.S. is now putting on North Korea to make sure they actually denuclearize.
It appears that the Secretary of State went into that meeting and said, we mean business. This is what we demand if you're going to give up your nukes. Of course, then both parties...
Why do you say that, Pete?
What? Because North Korea put out a statement after, of course, they've said multiple things, but this one sticks out. North Korea, in state-run media, had this response to the meetings with Mike Pompeo. They said, the attitude and stance the United States showed in the first high-level meeting between the countries was no doubt, they say, regrettable. The U.S. side came up only with its unilateral and gangster-like demand for denuclearization.
A person close to Pompeo had told me a couple of days ago he was going in, didn't use the word gangster, but said that he was going to read the Riot Act to North Korea because we've all seen these satellite images suggesting that they're backpedaling and that they're not getting serious in terms of actually denuclearizing.
Well, one thing that North Korea and a dictator does not like to hear are demands and putting you in a corner and telling you what to do. So it's no surprise that North Korea is coming out with a statement, but it also shows you the strength that Mike Pompeo had going in there. Obviously, he had goals that were set that he wanted to talk specifically to them about. So we have fresh sound from Mike Pompeo. He's still over in Asia. He was in Vietnam this morning, and this is the most recent sound and reaction about North Korea from Mike Pompeo.
People are going to make straight comments after meetings. If I paid attention to what the press said, I'd go nuts, and I refuse to do that. I am determined to achieve the commitment that President Trump made, and I am counting on Chairman Kim to be determined to follow through on the commitment that he made. And so if those requests were gangster-like they are, the world is a gangster, because there was a unanimous decision at the UN Security Council about what needs to be achieved.
We've got the world behind us, and he's making that clear. But look, Pete, this is real. The stakes are big for the president. He went out on a limb by having that summit in Singapore. Felt like the time was right for a deal. And if this falls apart, it's going to be embarrassing.
And has been a big critic, of course, of the Iran deal, which he felt like was a giveaway. So it takes a gangster to beat a gangster. And so if you have to be the gangster for freedom, then you go to that table and you say, we're the big dogs. We've got the big button. If we need to stare you down, we will. I think that kind of blunt talk is what you're going to need, because if you soft pedal your way into the negotiations, you end up getting concessions and then delays.
See weakness.
I think exactly. So listen, we're going to play later on in the program the way the media is reacting to this. Oh, it's over. It's never going to happen. This is the beginning of a long process. But you better start, as Trump has always shown, with your hardline position of what we want, and that's what they've said. And not we want denuclearization, and then we're willing to cut like some small little side deal over here like we did in the Iran deal. We mean business, and you better come to the table.
This is such a perfect example of how ADD our media is. Because you look around history, right? You look at our opening up with China relations. That took over 7 years to do. What we did with Russia, right? Ending up the Cold War. That took a long period of time. It takes time. We're going to have a lot more on
I like that.
coming up on
the media.
Right? It's terrible.
Yeah, big stories coming this week as well. The countdown on for the president to pick one of these 4 people as the next Supreme Court justice.
Well, President Trump narrowing down his list of Supreme Court candidates to the final 4. And our next guest argues in his new op-ed that, quote, Trump should nominate Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court to save his presidency. A big statement. Here with his case, Chicago federal court litigator Andrew Soltman. He is the first guest. This morning we're going to profile all 4 of the candidates. You're the first out the gates. We appreciate your time with us, Andrew. Make the case for us. First of all, who is Amy Coney Barrett, and why is she the right pick in your mind?
Well, she is a great pick for President Trump for multiple reasons. First off, she's eminently qualified. She looks the part. She does have experience. Now, granted, not a lot, less than a year, but her writings have been impeccable. She has those conservative credentials that are so important to President Trump and his base. It will motivate his base. It will cement the support among the right-wing constituency that President Trump likes so much, and it will help him if he decides to run for president again in 2020. One of the top 3 reasons why people voted for President Trump was because of the judicial vacancies and the abilities to appoint someone to the Supreme Court. So this is a really important issue, and I think with someone like Judge Barrett, he will nail it.
Andrew, conservatives seem to like her. They talk about one of the issues that's been brought up both amongst conservatives, also in the so-called mainstream press, stare decisis, looking at precedent, especially as it pertains to Roe v. Wade. Talk to us about that.
That's a really important issue because Supreme Court justices are supposed to give deference to previous decisions, yet they do have the flexibility to be able to look at a decision and say, wait a minute, we got it wrong 20, 30, 40 years ago. Judge Barrett has said in her writing that she believes stare decisis is important, but that judges have to have the flexibility to solve and amend previous decisions. Now, that's really important with the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is Roe versus Wade. If she's willing to basically look at previous decisions and overrule them, I think there's a real chance that should another abortion case come forward to the Supreme Court, she might be willing to basically buck previous precedent and overturn it, which obviously is the most important issue for many conservatives.
Well, and Andrew, that reveals maybe why those on the left have come out so stridently against her specifically. Her name has been in the press probably more than anyone else. She's criticized for a couple of things, as you mentioned. Her Catholic faith has been criticized, and also, you alluded to it a little bit, but a lack of experience. Now, we know she's been a law professor. Is a lack of a paper trail actually a good thing? Is there a, how do you spin that or talk about that?
Well, it's a great thing. She's been on the 7th Circuit for less than a year, so she doesn't quite have that record that some other justices and other judges would have in order to allow Democrats to attack her. Now, what's really interesting is that while she doesn't have the legal decisions, she does have a couple law review articles that she's written in 2003 and 2013. So we do get a feel for how she feels on many of these issues. Of course, we know about her personal background, so I think she's going to pass the test in terms of what conservatives want. But of course, the one thing they have to be careful of is that they don't get Souterized. Remember with Justice Souter, the conservatives at first were like, well, we think he's going to be fantastic, but in reality, he was much more liberal than what they thought because he didn't have that track record.
That's the fear of every conservative. I'm going to ask this of all the folks speaking on behalf of potential nominees. What justice, current or previous, would be most like Amy?
Oh, that's a hard one. I would probably go with Rehnquist because he wasn't a judge prior to be appointed to the Supreme Court. He had impeccable conservative credentials nonetheless and ended up being a real friend of the conservative cause. So I would probably compare her most favorably to someone like Rehnquist.
Interesting. Good stuff. Andrew Stoltman, thank you for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Anytime.
You got it. Thousands of anti-gun protesters forcing the shutdown of a major Chicago highway. The march ignoring police, taking up all 5 lanes instead of just the 2 they were allowed. Meanwhile, student-led rallies in more than a dozen cities across the nation, peacefully showing their support for the Second Amendment. Plus, in a second story here, a massive NASCAR wreck, wiping out half the field at Daytona.
Logano's a 2! Too big of a push! He caught the 41! The big one! Logano's caught up in it! Oh, my God.
Ricky Stenhouse Jr. triggering the chaos that ended the race for 7 cars. Driver Eric Jones driving away unscathed to claim his first career NASCAR Cup Series win. Ed, down to you guys.
That is unbelievable.
We are back with a Fox News alert, a life-saving mission and a race against Mother Nature happening right now in real time in Thailand to rescue the boys' soccer team trapped inside a cave for 16 days.
The best Navy SEALs from around the world, including the U.S., right here in the U.S., putting their own lives on the line trying to save these boys who are diving through narrow passages, hoping to bring out each boy one by one. Each trip will take 11 hours to walk, climb, and swim their way out, and the first could emerge in about 90 minutes. That's the best case scenario.
But the dark and dangerous cave isn't their only challenge. Another, of course, severe storm is brewing. The worry is that the water levels inside will continue to rise, and that has been a struggle from the very beginning. We want to bring in now Jake Zweig, a former Navy SEAL and combat swimmer who knows all too well the dangers of these diving conditions. Good to have you on with us this morning. Unfortunately, under these circumstances, give us all a sense of just how dangerous this dive is. You talk about these boys. Some of them don't even know how to swim, let alone dive. You look at the passageways. Take a close look. At certain points, it gets as skinny as one single human to fit through there. How difficult is this?
I would say it's really difficult. I would compare it to climbing Mount Everest at this point. 6% of the people die on Mount Everest. We've already had one fatality, unfortunately. There could be a couple more at the end of this. Knowing the people that are over there, the Navy SEALs, Thailand, American, some of the British cave experts that are there, I highly doubt they'll lose one of the kids, but there may be one of the rescuers that loses his life in this whole thing.
Jake, I spoke to one of your former colleagues as a Navy SEAL, Dave Sears, a couple of days ago, and he said Thursday night that he was not optimistic about getting all of the boys out. He was hoping, he was praying for their safety, but he was just saying that when you look at, just normal recreational scuba diving, there's already dangers inherent in that. And he said cave diving is just exponentially much more difficult. Can you walk us through that?
So, in recreational scuba diving, you can always come to the surface and breathe clean air. In this situation, if you get in trouble under the water, you can't come up to the surface, and that's what poses all the problems. There is no out. If you run into trouble, you better have more air on you, like the Thailand Navy SEAL didn't, and he passed away.
Wow.
It's easy to say, but it's a really bad situation. You just can't get out of the water. You're in a cave.
Jake, and the kids, we're told none of them know how to swim. They're young, they're scared, they've never been underwater, let alone scuba diving. How would you, it's difficult enough to keep yourself calm as a SEAL, even as an expert. How do you keep a kid calm and pull them along? You talk about the risk to the divers. Of course, the kids just as much at risk, if not more.
Yeah, I'd say they're probably going to give them a little sedative to calm them down a little bit. And then, you're just going to have to hope for the best. The good thing is they're probably going to have Kirby Morgan full hooded face masks on, so they can't spit out the regulator. So even if they panic and pass out, at the end of the day, they're still going to be alive when you get them out because they'll still be breathing.
Right.
So, they probably got a couple contingencies for them freaking out. But at the end of the day, they're little, so they'll hold on to them and drag them through the tunnels.
Well, we are 8 hours in, as we're being told, with the first boy being rescued out. We are all hoping and praying that he does come out with the diver safely at the end of this. Timing, talk to us about why this takes so long. Should we expect it to take a matter of days at this point?
Yeah, the big deal is, but people don't understand how much gear these guys have. They're normally traveling with 2 full scuba tanks and a reserve pony bottle. They can have upwards of 150 pounds of gear, and it's not just a straight swim. They've got to climb. They've got to get out and walk. They've got to re-tank up. So there's a whole lot of stuff that has to happen for them to actually get to the kids. Then they have to do it in the backwards fashion, put all that stuff back on with the kids now. So it's a whole bunch of different steps to this process. They got a lot of gear, and they're not just swimming the whole time. They're climbing rocks. They're getting out and walking. They got to take all the gear off.
Wow.
There's a whole lot of stages to this mission, much like climbing Mount Everest. No one just walks to the top of it.
It's a great comparison how prepared you need to be. Jake, before we let you go briefly, do you know how many Americans are there? Just briefly, do you have any sense?
I would guess there's probably close to 100 at this point.